The opinions of the guests and host are their own and do not represent the opinions of IRONCLAD, the Border Patrol, or the Department of Homeland Security.
If you had a massive flood in your house because the pipe upstairs broke and the water was flowing into your ceiling, your sheetrock was falling, your furniture was destroyed, what's the first thing you have to do? Shut off the main valve. So right now, ladies and gentlemen, the main valve for the fentanyl poisoning crisis is the Mexican cartels and their labs in Mexico producing poisonous substances. So Simple Mind says we have to decimate their capabilities. So how do we do that? We're going to put a lot more pressure on Mexico. No longer can they get away with saying, okay, mañana. No. Right now, today, we got to get a plan to go after the cartels so they're held accountable for killing American kids like at record levels. President has to basically declare war on the terrorists in the sense of use the technology. I'm not talking about going to war, boots on the ground. I'm talking about the sophisticated drone technology and other capabilities and decimate the command and control infrastructure of our great adversary right now. And anybody that thinks that's off the wall, go talk to the families that don't understand why they continually get away with killing these young kids. Why are they allowed to do this? I'm sorry, but I'm a competitive guy. I don't want to see Mexico beat us like this, and I certainly don't want to see all these kids going to have funerals and the families have devastated for life. It's enough is enough, so we have to be more aggressive on dealing with the cartels.
We cut through the partisan talking points. We're not interested in perpetuating fear. We're interested in seeking truth, hearing what's really going on America's borderland. Welcome to Borderland, an IRONCLAD original. Today we're bringing you my conversation with Derek Maltz. Derek retired from the DEA after 28 years of service. He led the Department of Justice Special Operations Division for almost a decade and was previously in charge of the New York Drug Enforcement Task Force. In his role at the Special Operations Division, he helped create a nationwide deconfliction program and coordinated efforts leading to the capture of El Chapo Guzman. I'm excited for you to hear this conversation. Hey, Derek, do me a favor. For the audience, would you mind giving us a short bio of yourself?
Derek Maltz, former director of DEA Special Operations Division. I spent 28 years in the DEA. My last 10, I spent in the center in Washington trying to synchronize efforts, going after transnational criminals around the world. My father was in the DEA 30 years. My brother was in the U.S. Air Force, pararescue. Unfortunately, came back in a body bag, fighting for this country. So I have a lot of passion for America and fighting for, the good citizens that deserve to live safely.
Well, I did not know that about your brother, man.
Hey, let me show you something, Vince, real quick, so you can appreciate it. So my brother was the cover of the pararescue brochure for recruiting. They just named a Special Warfare Aquatic Center after him at Lackland Air Force Base, $60 million facility. So it was an honor for our family that Mike was recognized. But every year they have the annual Maltz Challenge, which is done around the world to support U.S. military that have lost their loved ones in the battle out there in Afghanistan, Iraq, around the world.
That's incredible, man. Thank you so much for that history. And, I've heard your brother's name mentioned before in the past, being in the special operations community, it's a small knit community, and you hear about some of the deaths and his name is familiar to me. And so that's pretty wild. I didn't do the connection until now.
Thank you, buddy.
Well, brother, man, you have a very, very extensive background. And, on this show, we're trying to highlight some of the issues with drugs, with immigration issues, and some of the border stuff that's happening currently. And I guess if I'm going to pick your brain, I really want to dig into, how this current situation we have right now and how is it affecting the drugs in America. If I can bring that down to an even easier conversation, I guess, when you did time in New York back in the day, and then you went into the DOJ area. But right now, what you're seeing, what is the biggest concern that you see happening with the current crisis at the border?
So a couple of things in regards to the drug crisis. This is historic. We have never had anything like this in the history of America. So to be clear, this is not grandpa's opioid crisis. This is not anything we've experienced. We're losing American children, American citizens at record levels. It's a poisoning. It's a mass poisoning. The Chinese Communist Party are behind it. Their fingerprints are on it. They started this over 12 years ago, which I can get into some detail in a bit. But the Mexican cartels are taking total advantage of the wide open, porous border. They're making billions of dollars. They're running the largest human trafficking, sex trafficking, drug trafficking operation in the history of this country. And unfortunately, they're operating with impunity. They have no fear. So this madness is continuing as families around America are burying their loved ones. And I support families around America, Vince. As you can see behind me, the collages show some of the dead kids. The families are making collages. They're working like an army every day because the U.S. government is not doing the basic job in educating the public on this crisis.
We're coming out the gate swinging, so I'm ready. Here we go. So let's back it up to the China. What is your connection with China and what's happening right now? What are some of the details of the data that you know on that?
So to be clear, I was the head of the Special Operations Division, so I sat in the middle of, operations involving 30 agencies, 3 countries, NYPD, DOD, intelligence community, work closely with Admiral McCraven from Special Operations Command, work closely with Southern Command Leader James Stavridis, Admiral Stavridis. So we've been looking at these issues for many years. We worked on Project Cassandra, which is the DEA's infiltration into Hezbollah's global money laundering, drug trafficking network. But in regards to the Chinese, it's very interesting. And I lived this, and I watching it evolve is very scary. But basically, the Chinese criminals have had a relationship with the Mexican cartels for over 30 years. They have been providing precursor chemicals to produce methamphetamine for a very long time. And what happened was back in 2007, it was an eye-opener to me because we saw a $207 million U.S. currency seizure in a house in Mexico City, and it came from a Chinese chemical broker. We had never seen this kind of cash seizure. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure it's the largest cash seizure in the history of the world on a drug case, from what I know. But anyway, in around 2008, 2009, we started seeing the beginning of this Chinese chemical bombing of America with synthetic cannabinoids, synthetic cathinones, known as K2, spice, and bath salts on the streets of America. We started seeing increases in emergency room admissions. We saw like the Night of the Living Dead scenes where people were dropping like zombies, smoking this stuff. They thought it was synthetic marijuana. But so that was going on around 08, 09. Then in 2012, we started seeing, if you look at these little glassine bags, they were loaded up with white heroin all over the country. But all of a sudden, we started seeing people dying from illicit fentanyl, which we had never seen really on the streets too much, right? So it was all coming out of the Chinese labs. They were making this stuff. They were sending it on the internet. People in America were buying it, direct sales to America. Then they started providing the cartels with this fentanyl. Then they started selling them mass amounts of precursor chemicals to make this poison. Then they started getting involved with all the money laundering services for the cartels. Then they started showing them how to make these pills. And they started sending the Chinese down to Mexico. And then it became fake pill madness in America. Tsunami of pills started in the 2015, 2016. So the cartels started taking this over. But it's this evolving crisis. But Vince, one thing I want your audience to know is that it's now beyond fentanyl. What we have now is xylazine, which is horse tranquilizer that's rotting people down to the flesh in the bones of them, in their bones, right? Because it's causing necrosis. Xylazine is a horse tranquilizer, not made for human consumption. Unfortunately, the Chinese who want to destroy this country have recognized, let's get it out to Americans. They like drugs. They need drugs. So we'll add it to our arsenal of poisoning substances. But now, Vince, with the nitazines, the edonitazines, the metanitazines, isonitazines, these are the new, more powerful, 20 times more powerful than fentanyl. That's what's showing up in the autopsy reports today. So make no mistake, this is an ongoing attack. We are at war. It's a chemical substance. And shame on anyone in America who's not paying attention to this. Chris Wray is telling everyone in America that China is our biggest national security threat. He's the FBI director. So what the hell are we doing? Why are we not connecting the dots? And why are we not educating America on this threat?
You're in charge. You said you were in the rooms with some of the biggest agencies across the nation. They know the same information you do. How come right now, currently, there's nothing that is being done to stop this? I'm confused. If higher people in the government understand this, they know this. It's kind of happening in front of our faces. Why is there no actions being taken?
Okay, Vince, that's a great question, but I'm going to give it to you in a New York answer. If I had the brains to define how it's possible that our own government is facilitating the largest death and destruction operation ever by a foreign adversary, I wish I can explain it. I cannot explain it. I don't have the mental capacity to understand it. I'm very devastated. That's why for the last 7 years, I've been making collages of dead kids, working with the families, going on national news, going to Congress, showing all these dead kids, doing whatever I can to spread awareness to save lives. Unfortunately, they're not even doing the basic thing, Vince. Like, why are they not educating our young kids about this new poison that's in these pills? The kids today are facing increased anxiety, increased depression. They're going to drugs for help. Now, the kids, they don't know any better. They see mommy and daddy on Xanax, which is a very good drug if you're getting it from a pharmacy and from your doctor. But when you're buying it on the streets, the illicit drug supply is tainted with poison. So what's happening is kids are being deceived to death. When we were kids, Vince, right, we made mistakes, but we didn't die from mistakes, thank God, right? The kids today are dying from mistakes. A lot of these kids are first-time drug users. They're feeling a lot of anxiety. So I can't answer your question, but the American public should be asking their leadership, what the hell's going on? Now, law enforcement, let me make it clear. Even though morale is at rock bottom across the board in law enforcement because they don't have the support that they need, they're still fighting. They're still saving lives. They're still doing what they need to do, but they need help from the White House. They need the larger U.S. government apparatus to start working together to decimate the cartels. But Vince, how the hell are you going to do that when we're not even shutting down the border? We're inviting these unknown people from around the world. We have 1.8 million known gotaways already. Who the hell are these people in our country, right? So how are we going to do, how are we going to solve this if we're not even doing the basic stuff? It's crazy.
Well, it raises the question for me is you've been doing this for a long time, as in you were law enforcement for a long time, which is several different presidents. Have you seen differences in the different presidents? I don't care, Democrat, Republican, it doesn't matter, but has different presidents kind of taken a different position on this? Or does it just seem kind of across the line the same, no change?
Another great question, Vince. I really appreciate your questions. Number one, I want to make something really, really clear to your audience. I've said this on national TV. I said it on Dr. Phil. I've said it in Congress. What I talk about is not a red or a blue issue. It's a red, white, and blue issue. Every American's being impacted. Every community is being impacted. Rich, poor, black, white, Hispanic. I don't care. I'm standing up for the American public. Now, what I will say is this problem has gotten worse over the years. Of course, we've had an opioid addiction for many years. That's not the fault of any one president. And we've had, this going on for many years, like methamphetamine has been going on many years, cocaine trafficking. American population has been addicted to drugs for a long time. Unfortunately, now it's not drugs, it's poison coming from labs in China and overseas. So it's gotten worse. But the main thing, not to pick on any one administration, but what's different now is we've opened up the border and have allowed the Mexican cartels to operate with impunity. Makes no sense for national security and public safety. So yes, the last administration had very sound border policies. We saw a decrease in activity. If you talk to some of the Homeland Security officials, they will tell you it was the most secure border in 40, 50 years. That being said, why this current administration came into office and immediately reversed the sound processes that were working. I don't understand that. I also don't understand this contradiction, Vince. The FBI director, I was at a conference the last month, downtown DC, listening to him talk about the escalating threats to the national security of this country. He specifically mentioned China. He specifically mentioned post-October 7th massacre in Israel. But yet I wanted so bad to ask him, Mr. Wray, do you talk to your boss? Why the hell is the border then wide open? Does it make sense to a logical person? I didn't go to MIT or Harvard or Yale, but it's common sense. You don't open the border when you have this massive problem with the fentanyl poisoning on America and all this other stuff. Doesn't make sense.
This week on Change Agents, an Ironclad original presented by Montana Knife Company, Andy talks to Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and director of the Outlaw Ocean Project, Ian Urbina.
Sure, I think that journalists matter and we have a good role to play often. In this case, for sure. It was on the dark web. Some people in the space knew of its existence, but there's no way the Taiwanese prosecutors would have ever taken the case, arrested the guy. I mean, when I was even just, had we only put it on the front page of the New York Times and walked away, it wouldn't have resulted in a prosecution. It's only because we spent the next 4 years banging them the drum and coming back to them and putting stuff out and saying, hey, so you still haven't called the guy in? You know the name of the captain. You haven't questioned him? How is that possible? Well, he's at sea and it's difficult and he was in international waters, so we don't know if we have jurisdiction. You know, these sorts of roundabout questions. But because we stuck with it for multiple years, that ended up in a prosecution.
Watch new episodes every Wednesday wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube at This Is Ironclad.
Yeah, it's, the border conversation is so complex because you have the asylum cases that some are legit, some are not, right? You have this really weird space that it's hard to understand that. Then you have the notice to appear. Since there's such an abundance of immigration, we have nowhere to house them. So they felt the humane thing to do was go ahead and release them into the country, which is confusing at times because we don't necessarily have all the systems from all the other countries to identify whether they have a shady background or some kind of past that we might not be wanting in this country. And then you have the drug issue. It's like multiple layers of confusion that's happening. And with the drugs, yes. It seems to, we can identify the cartels have a stronghold on this, and they have pathways throughout America and many different routes of travel through the highways, through road, doesn't matter. What are we doing as Americans to stop the cartel? So, okay, we know it comes from China now, but the cartel for some reason is getting so powerful. And my fear, and I don't voice my own opinion on this too often, I'll say here is, are the cartels so embedded in our own potential, I guess, government or something that we're afraid to stop them? I don't know what to even make of this. I think the same as you is like, I wish I had the answer, but it's confusing to see what's happening directly in our face.
Yes, I agree. And it is very complex. I don't have the magic bullet solution. I do have some ideas, but so let me just back up and tell you something, what happened recently, and then kind of set the tone. So I went to the DEA's largest law enforcement gathering with 130 countries ever in the history of DEA. It was in Jamaica in September. 130 countries came together to collaborate, cooperate about this worldwide drug issue that we have, okay? Guess what country did not show up? Mexico. So the first question is, how's it possible that the head of the DEA is showing all these dead kids in her Faces of Fentanyl exhibit in DEA headquarters? How's it possible that our administration talks about Mexico's our greatest partner, that we have on the southern border? Okay, fine. So why are they not being held accountable for not even attending a very high priority law enforcement operational conference? It doesn't make sense. But that being said, we also know, according to some studies, and I'm not an expert on this, I'm only going by what I've read, in that the Mexican cartels are the 5th largest business enterprise in Mexico, right? So logic would say, well, why the hell would Mexico want to shut down their 5th largest business operation when especially the drugs are being exported, the majority of drugs are being exported out of Mexico, not only into America, but the cartels are now operating in 30, 40, 50 countries around the world, and they're very smart. They are going to send their products, like cocaine as an example, to areas where they can make more and they have less risk of getting arrested or extradited to sit in jail in America, for example. So they're sending the cocaine at record levels to Europe through West Africa. They're sending cocaine, they're sending meth to other parts of the world because they're making historic amounts of meth, for an example, and drugs in Mexico. So I don't know, Vince, if you're paying attention to some of the historic seizures of methamphetamine, but we're seeing in America thousands of pounds at a time being seized in different locations. We just had 4 tons of meth in, I believe, Texas. We had 16,000 or 11,000, I can't even remember anymore, pounds of meth being seized at the port of entry in El Paso, I think it was, or Texas. But my point is that production's off the charts. The corruption in these countries, including Mexico, is off the charts. We saw that in the conviction of the FBI equivalent in Mexico, Genaro Garcia Luna, the FBI director equivalent. He's in jail now for many years for being convicted in New York City, federal prosecution. But so corruption's involved. There's big money. The cartels are taking total advantage because the number one point I want to make is criminals are going to take advantage of all vulnerabilities and all weaknesses. Well, right now, we've shown them the cards and they know how to take advantage, and they are.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think it's oblivious to the listeners that the cartel kind of runs Mexico. And I say kind of, I'm being gentle about that. It's one of the, it's one of those conversations where it's plato y plomo, right? Like silver or lead.
Yeah.
You either work for us or you get killed. And that is, you see it constantly through political leaders, through law enforcement officials, anyone that comes into a position that tries to make significant, serious changes to the cartel, you find them shortly after, usually dead. And that's the truth about that country, is that it's very scary because the cartel, because of the money they make, the position they hold, the power they have in that country, there's, like I said, saying it gently, there's a lot of corruption there, and they seriously run that country and some of these border towns.
Right, and that's why, Vince, I have been very outspoken, including testifying not only in federal Congress, but in the state Congress in Ohio in 2019 to declare the cartels as terrorists so we can use all tools of national power to wipe them off the face of the earth, because they are destroying more families in America than any terrorist organization in the history of the country. We've never had a terrorist organization kill so many Americans, right, that we're seeing just from the drugs alone. Forget about the human trafficking, the sex trafficking, the other criminal activities. So we have to treat them way more serious than they're just another drug cartel. Nobody should ever call them a drug cartel again, because they're way beyond drug cartels. They're narco-terrorists, they're terrorists, whatever words you want to use, but they're destroying not only, the way of life in Mexico, but here in America, they're absolutely causing chaos everywhere.
Yeah, every time I talk about this conversation, it's a supply and demand, and we have to always question, why is America the biggest consumers of these drugs? What is it about America that in the past 20 years has turned into the biggest consumer of these drugs? And that's always a question, and that has almost irrelevant to the conversation, but also for the listeners, we should want to understand that answer. Well, and in your opinion, what does that look like to you?
So it's real simple in my mind. The Colombian geniuses, they started producing 80 to 90% white heroin, putting them in these little bags, and they got people addicted. They got a new population, younger population addicted, because historically, Vince, the younger generation wasn't going to go to some dark alley and put a needle in their arm and shoot up heroin. Then they could buy these bags for $10 a bag and snort it up in their nose. Well, then, here, this is the key to your question right here. The American cartel emerged, big pharma, okay? They dumped 100 billion opioids into America in a 9-year period. In Washington Post, outstanding reporting, Scott Higham and Sari Horwitz, who I worked with, They actually did a report showing that Big Pharma produced $100 billion and dumped them into America, and they operate with impunity in America. So yeah, a lot of people got addicted. The young kid goes to the doctor for root canal. Instead of giving the kid Motrin, the doc says, "Hey, kid, here's 50 oxy." Right?
Yeah.
The kid goes home, never a drug addict, starts taking oxy, and then of course he's going on the streets to buy this stuff here in the bags. Okay.
Yeah. We've seen in the military.
Getting addicted to heroin. And then later on, because of this other madness with fentanyl, now the heroin snort is a dead kid because it's got fentanyl. So yeah, America's been addicted to drugs a very long time. This isn't anything new. But what's new now is that there's increased depression, increased anxiety.
Yeah.
So they're turning to drugs at a younger generation. And here's what else is new. When I grew up as a DEA agent, kids were not sitting in their homes, in their bedroom, on these social media sites, clicking on links to go order drugs and have the drug dealer come to the house and making payment on Cash App or, Snap, Venmo, or one of these payment systems, right? They're making it easier. And unfortunately, social media companies have actually facilitated the ability for young kids to buy these drugs from the cartels. So the cartels are now in everybody's bedroom. The cartels are in your living room. They're in your house all day long. So for parents that are not paying attention, because parents are much busier today, they're working, both of them usually, right? So they're trying to make a living. They're trying to support their family. So the kids have more, time alone. Unfortunately, that's leading to some serious consequences. So a lot of complex issues are involved. But Vince, our government's not staying up with the times either. Like the bad guys are using encrypted apps. Law enforcement can't even infiltrate the damn things, even with court orders, because our Congress has got cobwebs in their eyes and their ears and you know what else. They're not paying attention to the evolving communications. So law enforcement is in the dark. They are not able to do their job because they have probable cause to go after some of these large organizations. In many cases, they can't because they don't have the laws in their favor. The bad guys don't operate with any laws. They have no budget. They have no bureaucracy. So we're falling behind rapidly.
I was jumped a few years ago at a gas station. What are some easy to use self-defense techniques?
What is the most cost-effective way to make sure my home is secure?
What would happen if there was a global internet or cellular outage? What is your suggestion for comms?
What should I do if I hear shots ringing out?
Or what I should do if there's a major terrorist attack.
How is your faith tied in to being a protector?
Is there a moral case for taking a life?
What is your recommendation on critical EDC?
What should I have? What's the best?
What should I do?
What does that look like?
What would you recommend? Is there anything I could do?
It's for the listeners and viewers. This is not like a story that only addicts and those families that have history of addiction needs to pay attention to. There's an average kid at a high school in a locker room, takes one pill for a headache and it has laced with fentanyl. This is a concern for me, for my kids who are in high school, my kids who are in junior high, my kids who are in college. This is a conversation that is so scary. Like you said before, you can make one mistake, you can experiment one time, and you can find yourself never waking up again.
Well, Vince, it's even beyond what you just said. You did a great job articulating that. Thank you. But here's what I would say to that. There's kids that get dropped off at this Bronx daycare center. And there's kids that look like this young Dominican, beautiful baby. His mother dropped him off to go to daycare. He's not a drug addict. He was 1-year-old kid. And guess what? Mom got the call that the kid is dead. And guess what? The daycare worker, the drug trafficker, instead of calling 911 when 3 babies went down or 4 babies went down,
I read the story.
She called her husband to get the stash out of the facility, and then they called 911. It was too late. And by the way, I'm glad you brought that up because we're making collages now with all these very young kids that are dying. I have a friend that I work with in my, work here with the Lost Voices of Fentanyl. This poor woman, she had a 3-year-old, okay? His name was Cash. I'm not going to go crazy with these pictures to your audience, but this is the mama at our rally last year, okay? This poor 3-year-old gets dropped off at her ex-husband's house for the weekend, right? The custody battles that everyone's dealing with. He gets up into the stash in one of the tenants' rooms, and his 3-year-old baby died from fentanyl ingestion. Now, here's the part of the story I want to tell you. What I was very touched by this beautiful story is that this woman was addicted her whole life. She smoked crack. She was homeless, living on the streets. She was trying to get her life back together. She got pregnant. And by the way, she admits saying like, look, I couldn't get off the addiction. It was powerful. But as soon as I knew my baby was coming, I stopped. I stopped using drugs. She said at the end, she says, I never thought that my addiction would end because of the birth of my child, but my child died because someone else's addiction.
Damn.
It was so sad. And now I have a picture. I'm not going to show it, but 3-month-old in his coffin. I'm sorry, 3-year-old in the coffin as mom is sitting there over the coffin. So it's not just drug addicts. It's not just, people with depression, anxiety. It's a whole, like, our future generation is dying. China's behind it. Did you see the Homeland Security? I'm sorry, the China House Select Committee's recent findings on this CCP's involvement? Have you seen that?
No, I haven't. Please enlighten me.
Okay, so I participated with this group, and afterwards I was actually briefed up, and I saw the website. So the House China Select Committee did an investigation and has established clearly that the PRC, People's Republic of China government, under the control of the CCP, strategically and economically benefited from fentanyl crisis. They subsidize the manufacturing and exports of fentanyl analogs and precursor chemicals outside of China. They give tax rebates. They also have given grants and awards to companies that are trafficking these materials outside of China. They hold ownership at some of these companies that are tied to these drug trafficking groups. They're failing to prosecute fentanyl and precursor manufacturer exporters. They're allowing open sales over their CCP-controlled internet to sell these chemicals and drugs outside of China. So basically, the bottom line is they're helping destroy and kill our citizens, and America's sitting back and not even going after this aggressively from the White House.
Yeah, it's why wage a war when you can create a madness through drugs? You can destroy a country internally through just drugs.
Right. They're basically taking advantage of America's addiction to drugs. They're operating in a stealth operation under the disguise of drug addiction, and they're wiping out our future generation. And by the way, on that note, because you brought it up, I want you to know, my friend here, Vince, U.S. military's dying at record levels as well.
Oh, yeah. I've personally have seen that happen.
Yeah. So they're depressed. They don't like what they're experiencing, some of them. They're going to turn to these drugs. Look, the West Point cadets. 2 years ago, I got called late night to go on a national news show in the morning because 5 cadets went down from snorting what they thought was cocaine. It was actually fentanyl. And so thank God they all lived, as far as I know. But Vince, one other thing that I want you to realize is that what's frustrating me, and you could see the intensity and how pissed off I am, because I work with the Army of Families. I hear the stories every day. I got a message the other day. The lady said, hey, Mr. Maltz, you remember when we were working together at the Lost Voices of Fentanyl rally, putting up the banners? Guess what? I just lost my second child to fentanyl poisoning this weekend. So this is the kind of stuff I get hit with. So it really bothers me that we're not even, like our CDC, for example, make it clear. If I was the president, fired immediately. They don't even put out timely and accurate statistics to the public. When COVID was going on every night, COVID cases, COVID deaths, we don't even know how many people have died from fentanyl. The numbers are rough estimates, but more importantly, We don't even know the hundreds of thousands that have been saved by Narcan because no one's tracking the fentanyl poisonings, the mass casualties that the EMS are saving on every one of these calls. It's 2 weeks ago in Austin, Texas, right? We had like 11 dead, 79 poisoned in Austin, Texas, the capital of Texas. And by the way, the EMS, they said it was like 1,000% increase in EMS calls. It's insane. We're not even tracking that.
Yeah, law enforcement officers currently almost in Texas everywhere have Narcan or a derivative of that, as well as EMS. It's become a thing where it's just your normal daily carry. That's crazy.
At IRONCLAD, we've been able to develop a catalog of really interesting, compelling, successful series. It's everyone from a Fortune 500 brand like Caterpillar to people like Chad Robichaud or Derek Wolf. Take our learnings from what we've done and develop with those shows and bring them to our clients to make sure that they can get a service offering at IRONCLAD that they can't get anywhere else in the industry.
What are some other ways? No, you're right. And the more I've done this show, when we first started, it talked about a lot of the immigration, but you can't talk immigration without talking about drugs. And, know, you're giving one example. What are some other things that you would like to see happen that would hopefully create some kind of lull in the drug trafficking space?
Well, okay. So I'm going to give you a simple analogy, and I'm going to watch your facial expressions to see if you crack a smile. You already did, so it's too late.
I'm already nervous.
So here's the deal. I'm like a simple kind of guy, and one of my father friends in the Lost Voices of Fentanyl gave me this analogy, but it's perfect. If you had a massive flood in your house because the pipe upstairs broke and the water was flowing into your ceiling, your sheetrock was falling, your furniture was destroyed, what's the first thing you have to do? Shut off the main valve. So right now, ladies and gentlemen, the main valve for the fentanyl poisoning crisis is the Mexican cartels and their labs in Mexico producing poisonous substances. So Simple Mind says we have to decimate their capabilities. So how do we do that? We got to put a lot more pressure on Mexico. No longer can they get away with saying, okay, mañana. No. Right now, today, we got to get a plan to go after the cartels so they're held accountable for killing American kids like at record levels. And if Mexico is not willing to come on board with us, like the Colombians back in the day, in the Pablo Escobar days, they joined forces with America. They welcomed America, your DOD assets, intelligence community assets, because they had a huge problem developing with these narco terrorists. Well, Mexico's even worse. So now, if they don't do it, then the president has to basically declare war on the terrorists in the sense of use the technology. I'm not talking about going to war, boots on the ground. I'm talking about the sophisticated drone technology and other capabilities and decimate the command and control infrastructure of our great adversary right now. And anybody that thinks that's off the wall, go talk to the families that don't understand why they continually get away with killing these young kids. Why are they allowed to do this? They're flooding the zones on the Border Patrol with hundreds of migrants. They're taking away all our resources at Border Patrol, and then they're coming in with the high-value targets and the drugs. Then they're bringing the guns and the money southbound. So they're beating us every day. I'm sorry, but I'm a competitive guy. I don't want to see Mexico beat us like this, and I certainly don't want to see all these kids going to have funerals and the families have devastated for life. It's enough is enough. So we have to be more aggressive on dealing with the cartels. Former Attorney General Bill Barr was on many, many news shows and has said it pretty clearly. They can't be treated as criminals. It's not working. We can indict as many of these people as we want. And I respect law enforcement. I encourage ongoing indictments is always positive. But if we don't get them timely and they're not feeling the accountability, then we have to use other capabilities and authorities. And U.S. government has it. So anyway, we should be stepping up. But we also have to hold people accountable. If the death statistic numbers are going up, then the leaders of these government agencies have to be held accountable. We can't continue to see the same numbers. Now, again, statistics are manipulated, so I don't trust any of the numbers. But we have seen, like in Indianapolis, for example, they did the Marion County prosecutors have done a recent analysis to see the drastic decline from 22 to 23 in fentanyl deaths. So I was very encouraged to see that because they're working as a team. There's a unity of effort. They're working with the coroners. They're working with all the law enforcement agencies. They're working with industry, and they're solving problems. Right now, we got to get accountability on the big agencies in government to start working together. We're splitting apart again like pre-9/11. That's not good.
So
that's not good.
No, not
when
at all.
I got to my operation, Vince, there were 9 agencies. When I left, there were 30. Now, why did that happen? Because we needed a unity of effort after 9/11 because the complex threats were growing. Well, now the threats are off the charts. So more now than ever, we need accountability to these agencies working together, and we don't have that. I can guarantee you that. I work with this every day of the week.
What is the biggest, I guess, the most effective way that fentanyl has made its way into America? Is it by body carriers or is it through the border? Do you know?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, again, if you listen to the experts, they say, 90% or whatever the hell they say these days are coming through the port of entry. I would say there's an old saying, you don't know what you don't know. Just like we don't know the 1.8 million gotaways that are in the country. We don't know who they are, where they came from, what they're going to do, what their plan is. We don't know how many shipments of drugs come across the wide open border in between the ports of entry. What we do know is that CBP has done a tremendous job in seizing mass amounts of fentanyl at the POE in these tractor trailers, in these cars, in these hidden compartments. But the traffickers will go to any extreme to feed the beast, right? So in other words, the demand is there, the money's there, so they're going to get the stuff into the country one way or another. They will figure out innovative methods to get it in the country. We have seen significant, there's like 27,000 pounds of fentanyl seized at the border last year, according to CBP statistics. This year, there's over 10,000 already in the 6 months of fentanyl pounds. But anyway, to answer your question, it's coming in by couriers. It's coming in compartments. It's coming in containers. It's coming in on the flights. They're mailing stuff in left and right. They're running stuff in. They're bringing liquid chemicals like liquid meth into the country in gas tanks, and then they're making the conversion labs here in America, like in Atlanta.
Oh, shit.
So, and the cartels, here's another thing that people don't realize. The cartels are sending so many operatives into America to do their business here, like set up these labs, pick up the money, deliver the cash to the Chinese nationals who are now moving the money. And by the way, don't forget that the Chinese nationals that are picking up millions of dollars in cash from drug traffickers, they're buying farmland strategically positioned by our military installations. They're buying houses. They're converting houses into marijuana grow operations, which are happening now all over the country. And let's not forget, ladies and gentlemen, we know they are importing Chinese pesticides. Let me say that again slowly. They are importing pesticides from China. America should be very concerned about pesticides from China. We're concerned about pesticides made in the USA causing cancer. Just imagine what China could be sending in to spray on the marijuana if they wanted to destabilize and destroy their greatest adversary. So that's another whole story for another day on the marijuana side.
Yeah. So when you say that China is purchasing land and they're also the ones who are money laundering, is that's all proven? Have we seen that?
Yes, 100%. Yes, it's on the internet. There's many, many cases. I talk to the cops routinely about this. So I'll give you an example. One of the schemes that they use is, so they make the deal in Mexico between the Chinese broker and the cartel leader. Let's say they want $500,000 picked up in Chicago, drug money. There will be coded messages that are sent. The couriers in Chicago will arrange a meeting, okay, with prearranged codes. The cartel person will drop off the $500,000 in cash, and the Chinese kid, who's here on a visa in many cases, will pick up a suitcase of cash. They will deliver the cash to the Chinese businessman. Maybe he's a high roller in Las Vegas, as an example, because they use the casinos to launder the money. He will then get on. This is where it's brilliant, Vince. I'm going to show you with this little, graphic here. They'll take their phone. They'll go on the Chinese banking apps. They will move 500 grand from their own account in China to another account in China, and they'll order up $500,000 in consumer goods. The goods will be shipped to Mexico, and the goods will be sold for like 3 million, let's say, in pesos, whatever. So that's how the cartels get paid back in Mexico, because this is a cycle. It's called mirror transactions. It's happening all over America. We've testified about it. It's not some convoluted, right-wing crazy conspiracy. It's factual. And by the way, on that note, there was a story that came out, Washington Examiner, I believe. In 1 year time frame, there was $6.1 billion in purchases of real estate and land by Chinese businessmen, and 58% of those transactions were done in cash. Chinese businessmen can't get more than $50,000 a year out of China because they have very strict laws on cash exports. So that's why they want the cash here. So we're allowing them to buy properties, buy land, invest in our country. At the same time, they're facilitating the madness with the cartels. How does that make sense? Does everyone feel good about that? Because I don't.
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack. And, I only asked you if it was proven because for those who are naysayers who are listening, I wanted to make sure that I made that point.
I'm glad you did that, and I like you a lot. I like the way you roll, by the way. So that being said, for those that do have a question, and maybe you're sitting there going, wow, this guy is a little crazy. No, don't ever mistake passion for craziness, okay? I told you I buried my brother. I made it a commitment that when I took over my Special Operations Division, I would never worry about the politics. I'd never worry about what I say. I want to get the facts to the public. I want to help create a safer America. But you could go look online in the Chicago newspaper, as an example. It was well documented, the Chinese money laundering case. They even have the slide that shows the mirror transactions that was used in court as a government exhibit, as the one trafficker picked up $24 million in cash, the Chinese trafficker. So the stories are all over the internet. You just got to do some research. But what I ask everybody that's watching this show to do is start connecting the dots. This is not just a drug crisis. It's not about smoking marijuana, so don't get pissed off when someone's talking about it. It's a poisoning against the country, and we have to get better educated because what we're talking about is impacting everyone. And sorry, but if you're not aware of this, you're not paying attention to really what's going on.
Yeah, there's no family that's immune to this. If you live in America, there's a chance it meets you right at your own doorstep. Exactly,
100%. And that's really the message. Vince, let me show you this real quick. So I was going to Arizona on a visit, right? So, I'm one of these guys that, takes this stuff really serious. I get motivated easy. So I want to show you this here. I'm going to read you this, the back of this, what was said to me. Derek, please take Alex with you to Arizona. She should have been graduating from Arizona State University this year. She was killed by a single counterfeit oxycodone pill that came across our border. Thank you for everything you're doing. God bless Alex's dad, Matt. Now, reason I show this, it was 3 days before Christmas when this poor girl came home. Yeah, she had a little anxiety. She only took half a pill because she bought this pill on social media, and unfortunately, her mother went to the bedroom and she was dead in the bedroom. This is happening everywhere. This is not made up. That's why many parents now are suing Snapchat, as an example, for facilitating what they say is the death of their kids. It's a very serious matter, and it is. Everyone is vulnerable. Every kid is vulnerable. Every parent has to get better, educated. That's why I push the documentary Dead on Arrival. It's 20 minutes long. I'd be watching it if I were you with your kids, your grandkids, your nephews, your nieces. It's 20 minutes, and it's the story of my family friends. Outstanding documentary. And it really, puts it all together for the families. so everyone's vulnerable. Stop looking at this as a political issue. It's not.
I love that, because that's the hard part, is that people want to pull politics into every argument, and it's not. These are American issues. If you live in this country,
Yes.
you should be concerned about this.
Right. And that's why I came up several years ago, Vince, I came up with that corny little saying just because I wanted to make it clear. It's not red or blue. It's red, white, and blue. When I get called to go to a rally, I don't ask the person, were you a Democrat, Independent, or Republican? I just go to support them. You look behind me, you look at these kids, they're Democrats, Independents, and Republicans. I don't really care. They're Americans, and that's what I care about.
I love it. Thank you so much, Derek. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your testimony. This is wild, man. I think this is going to be eye-opening for a lot of our audience, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your service and what you're doing. You're an outstanding host. I don't say that lightly. I get interviewed a lot, but I really liked you, man. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to Borderland, an Ironclad original. Make sure that you like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and on YouTube at This Is Ironclad.